Even as a candidate, President Trump stated that he wanted to loosen up regulations that he believes stifles economic growth. One area he is rolling back regulations in is in the energy sector, with rollbacks for the fossil fuel industry, and environmentalists aren't pleased. Alex Barron is an assistant professor of environmental science at Smith College, who also worked in the Environmental Protection Agency under the Obama administration. He joined us in studio to explain why he's opposed to these changes.
We're now 2 years into this administration, and we're sort of living through a relatively quiet but pretty unprecedented rollback of environmental protections. So depending on how you count them, you can get all sorts of different numbers. The New York Times had a tally of about 80 rules and policies that are either have been rolled back, they attempted to roll them back and were blocked by the courts, or they're in the process of doing that right now. So that's a lot of policies. Some are sort of implemented strictly by the White House, and others are what are called regulations issued by agencies. And they affect a whole swath of things related to the environment. But many of them are sort of targeted or relate to the fossil fuel industry, so people who are producing or burning fossil fuels. And what we can expect as these protections are weakened is impacts on air quality, impacts on climate change, and other public health impacts, like impacts on pollution of groundwater.
Okay, what are some in particular that concern you?
So one rule that I worked on while I was at the Environmental Protection Agency was a rule to limit mercury emissions from coal-fired power plants. So mercury is a neurotoxin. It gets out into the environment, usually ends up in fish. People eat those fish, and then that sort of mercury can build up in their bodies. It's particularly bad for developing fetuses and for small children, but it can also have health impacts for adults. And in 1990, a bipartisan majority in Congress charged the EPA with looking into mercury emission from power plants and, if appropriate, regulating them. It took about 20 years for EPA to actually get that regulation out the door, and they're now sort of in the process of looking to undermine the legal basis for that rule. And so that means not just more mercury in the environment, but also a lot of other sort of conventional air pollution, the kind of air pollution we associate with smog and with people having breathing difficulties, or even more severe impacts like premature death associated with exposure to air pollution. So we know that all those things together have a range of impacts on the public, some of which we can put a dollar value on and some of which we can't. But there's also been rules to look at things like that were in response to environmental crises that we've already had. So there was a bunch of regulations following on the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, which killed 11 people, sort of tightening up safety requirements in that industry. And actually, there was a series of high-profile coal waste spills at the start of the Obama administration, which led to a rule on coal waste. And there was actually a report that just came out this morning with the results of some groundwater testing in that rule that showed that about 90% of these coal waste repositories are leaking heavy metals at unsafe levels into the groundwater nearby them. Now, that doesn't mean that people are necessarily drinking that water yet, but that's another example of a kind of place where that was a rule that was put in place in the Obama administration, and now they're looking to sort of weaken the testing requirements and the reporting requirements in that space, right at a time when we're learning that actually the risk from these facilities might even be greater than we thought it was at the time.
So the Trump administration says they listed 13 deregulatory actions, saying that it's saving Americans $2 billion. So the other side is going to say, listen, all of these regulations are really hurting people and they're killing jobs. Yeah. So what's your response to that?
One often hears the word regulation in the context of burdensome or job killing. And I think first it's important to remember what a regulation is. So having worked at a regulatory agency, you don't just wake up one morning and decide that this would be something good to do. Regulations are agencies implementing laws that were passed by Congress. So all of these, and in fact, if an agency issued a rule that didn't relate to some authority given to it by Congress or some obligation from Congress, the courts would block that rule. And so in that way, regulations are just the law is sort of interpreted through the agency. And I regard laws as sort of an embodiment of our values. So things like we should have access to clean, safe drinking water. We shouldn't have to breathe dirty air, those kinds of things. And I'm not going to say that every regulation issued under the Obama administration was perfect, or that every environmental regulation is perfect, and nor am I going to pretend that they don't have costs for business. But I think the dialogue that's been coming from the administration is remarkably one-sided, because certainly if I own an oil refinery and I have to install some air pollution controls, that's a financial burden for my business, and it can have impacts on those firms. There's actually almost no evidence of sort of large-scale, national-scale employment impacts from environmental regulation. Scholars have looked really hard for that kind of thing, and it's been really hard to find examples of that, but it can have local impacts. But there are also real burdens for people associated with the pollution that these rules control. So if I'm a parent living near that oil refinery, and I'm having to wonder whether I can let my child play outside that day because they have asthma, or I have an elderly relative whose health is negatively impacted by that air pollution, that's also a burden to society. And the challenge for regulators is balancing those two within the sort of directions that came from Congress.
Right. So one of the things that we're talking about, so the coal plants, one of the rollbacks that Trump had talked about was, loosening up the regulations as far as how much carbon dioxide per megawatt hour. So under Trump, it would be 1,900. Mm-hmm. Under Obama, it was 1,400. But certainly people from the coal industry and those who depend on those jobs in that area say, hey, listen, these regulations are killing us. So there is that local impact and that job impact.
I think there's two separate issues there. The first is sort of where the standard should be set, and we can come back around to that if you want. But I think this perception that environmental regulations are damaging the coal industry is not well supported by what's actually happening in the industry. So what we've seen in the coal industry over several decades is an increasing movement towards mechanization, which means fewer employees, and to mining out the sort of the coal that's cheapest to get at, right? So that's been sort of one mega trend. And then the other thing that's happened is that the boom in fracking has meant that natural gas has gotten really cheap. And so what's actually happening is that people are choosing to burn natural gas instead of coal. And most analysts who've sort of tried to back out the impact of environmental regulations find that those two things are really responsible for what's happening in the coal industry, and that environmental regulations are kind of sort of in the noise as far as those things happen. And I think it's actually really bad for communities that are experiencing this transition to pin everything on environmental regulations, because it deters the conversation from really tough choices about what does it mean to have built a local economy around a fuel that society is now transitioning away from. And we should absolutely respect the contributions of those coal miners and work to give those communities assistance. But these new coal plants, investors have already decided that climate change is real, and they don't want to invest money in a new uncontrolled coal plant that emits CO2 at a high rate. And so I think you would have to look very hard in the US to find a power company, no matter how liberal or conservative the part of the country, that actually wants to spend money building a new coal plant like this. There's been a decade now of CEOs saying, we're not going to build new coal plants because the future is lower carbon energy sources, first natural gas, and then in the long run renewables. And we're starting to see utilities committing to sort of 100% clean energy portfolios. It's an example of a place where these regulations, if well designed, can actually aid that transition, right? So the rule issued under the Obama administration was designed to say, let's let people go to their investors and say, we have to build a plant that has this level of efficiency because the EPA is requiring us to, which also aligns with where we think the industry is headed. Let's design electric vehicles because we know that the world is heading towards cars that emit less CO2, and we want to provide a glide path for industry to get there, where sort of everyone is on the same competitive playing field.
Right, but the other thing that he had changed was the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, which is something that you had worked on under the Obama administration, which was under a different name.
Yeah, so it was called the Clean Power Plan in the Obama administration, and this was a rule to limit carbon pollution from existing power plants. And that's where the bulk of the improvements in the environment would have come from, because, as I mentioned, people are not really building these new power plants. And this is a rule that when the Obama administration did the math, you're delivering huge benefits in terms of just cleaner air, and then also delivering benefits in terms of reduced global warming. And the sort of wonky language in the statute is that the rule is supposed to be the best system of emissions reductions. And one of the things that we've learned about the replacement rule that's been proposed by this administration is that it actually increases emissions of CO2 and of conventional air pollution in 19 of 50 states. And even in the administration's own analysis, that exposes maybe 1,000 people a year to premature death. Right? So when you have pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide that are emitted from power plants, they form these small particles in the atmosphere, and you can breathe those deep into your lungs, and that's where there's decades of epidemiological evidence and other health studies that show that those can trigger heart attacks and stroke and lead to asthma attacks and a whole series of other negative health outcomes. And so that's just the air pollution piece of the rule that comes along as a benefit with reducing the greenhouse gas pollution. And of course, that's a pollutant that doesn't cause direct health impacts, but has effects on the climate that last hundreds of years. So whatever happens with the rule, the CO2 that's emitted now is going to be with us and our grandchildren and their grandchildren.